Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee for Tuesday, May 16th. Are there any potential conflicts of interest? Anybody? No? We'll move on to 3, citizens' comments. Citizens' comments, one more time, citizens' comments, seeing none. 4, consent agenda, minutes of the May 2nd, 2023 meeting, and bills and payroll. What's your pleasure? Okay, we have a second? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, like sign? All right, seeing none, we'll skip over number 5 because nothing was removed. 6, request to recommend council approval budget resolution number 072023, police station feasibility study presented by Chief Goering.
Okay, thank you. As I believe all of you are aware, back in December, we were approached by the building owner of the Wildwood Plaza as a potential donation to the city for possibly repurposing that building rather for a police department. We went through the process to move forward with that project. Ultimately, on the 25th, the Common Council approved moving forward with the project. As we have a company that's willing to do the study for the feasibility study. And then Police and Fire Commission did approve a transfer of money that we had approved in our CIP for a roof project of $60,000. Repurpose that money to the feasibility study. So the amount that was proposed for the study is actually $39,800. We currently have the $60,000 in our capital improvement plan for the roof replacement. There's no major issues going on with the roof that would decrease the value of the building. And if this project is successful, we're hopeful that we won't be in the building very much longer. So we would like to have that CIP money transferred for the purpose of this feasibility study. And we look for your approval for that.
Okay. Ed, are you making a motion?
Yeah, I was make a motion that we accept the budget transfer.
And that's a second.
Yeah.
Any questions from the committee?
Just
go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, the consultant's study is set at a fixed rate, right? I mean, we haven't identified any additional projects they may need to look at in that building.
We haven't yet. The only concern that we would have to stray away from this proposal would be if something else pops up that we need to study. I don't know what that would be. So you may have an idea.
Yeah, I may have an idea. We'll discuss that later. So
yes, sir. Okay. Well played.
Anything else? All right, so we have a motion and a second to transfer money from the CIP, $39,800 for the feasibility study.
Yes, ma'am.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? Seeing none, that passes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, that was number 6. Okay, 7, request to recommend council approval of contract extension for ambulance billing and collection services with LifeQuest, presented by Jennifer Zielinski, Finance Director.
Okay, so our 5-year contract with options to extend is actually expiring here next week, and we're running the proposed contract through its paces between the fire department and finance and legal, and we're not going to be able to wrap that up by the expiration date of May 23rd. So we have simply asked LifeQuest to renew the existing contract for 90 days while we wrap up getting the contract, to our satisfaction and theirs. LifeQuest was recently bought out by another company, so the contract language is a little different. So we want to make sure we take our time and run through that, and they've granted a 90-day extension. So with your approval, I would ask that we execute that amendment for 90 days with the existing contract that we currently have.
Okay.
Approved.
Okay, so we have a motion. Is there a second? And we have a motion and a second. Any questions from the committee? Okay, seeing no,
Mr. Rigel.
oh, I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Just a quick question. Do we anticipate any difficult changes with the new language from the new company?
There are a couple of items that we've already communicated back and forth, and then I'm still waiting for a thorough review from our legal counsel. They've asked for some changes to the fee structure that I'm not quite comfortable with at this point, so we'll have to just work through getting a draft we're comfortable, presenting it to them, and then, meeting somewhere in the middle.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay.
He found the wrong button.
We do have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? All right, seeing none, that is approved. All right, number 8, request to recommend council approval of agreement for services for a compensation market update with McGrath Human Resources Group, presented by Steve Barr, City Administrator.
Thank you. Better if I turn it on. Thank you. On April 11th, the council did authorize staff to go and secure a proposed agreement from McGrath Human Resources to conduct a compensation market study. And again, remind people, this is the 5-year follow-up to the plan that we adopted back in 2018. On the 25th of April, 2 weeks later, the council approved a budget resolution authorizing the transfer of $26,380 from the city's general fund contingency to cover the expected cost. And a reminder that they proposed to us a base package of roughly $16,000 and then 2 possible options, and the council chose one of those 2 options. So effectively, we took 2 of the 3 components of what they had proposed to us. So anyway, the agreement you have before you tonight is based largely on the scope of services that you've already seen. I did run it by the city attorney, and it occurred to me this afternoon, not too long ago, that I still haven't gotten a response from him. So I would make the request to approve or recommend council approval of this agreement subject to anything that the city attorney might find in his review. I don't think you'll find a lot because, again, it's pretty close to a document he's already seen, but oftentimes he finds a couple of issues that need to be tended to. So that'd be my recommendation, that the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee recommend council approval of the attached agreement subject to any changes that may be suggested between now and next Tuesday by the city attorney.
Okay, thank you. What's your pleasure? Anyone?
Move approval of the contract,
Do we have a motion?
pending any changes made by the city attorney, obviously.
And we have a second. Are there any questions from the committee? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, like sign? All right, seeing none, that's a go, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, number 9, review proposed changes to the timing of performance reviews and pay increases, presented by Sarah Dressel, Human Resources Director. Sarah.
Thank you. So just a little bit of an overview. Our employee appraisal, our performance appraisals are typically held right now in the July timeframe. So basically, it starts in June, and by July, we are putting through the budget changes for all of the changes that are occurring as a result of that performance appraisal. So that was done several years ago, moving it from January to that July timeframe. However, it was not ever updated as far as the policy goes. So when you do see the policy online, it does reflect the January 1 date. In talking with all of the leadership, it pretty much was the consensus that we would like to move that back to the January timeframe. Specifically, just looking at the June, July timeframe, it is kind of our busy season for most departments within the city. And just trying to coordinate that with vacations and things like that, sometimes it does get a little bit tricky meeting with employees. And we really want to make sure that the appraisal process is really fully worked out between the employee and the supervisor. So So for July of 2022 to June of 2023, for that review period, we are going to move forward with how it is currently as far as conducting a review, but we are looking to modify that review. It would include still all of the accomplishments, the opportunity areas, as well as priorities and goals for the remainder of 2023. So anything that would happen from July until the end of the year. And then in January of 2024, we would start the process of the new review forms that we are currently kind of looking at and reviewing. And then by February, they would be meeting with employees, discussing the reviews and setting goals for the remainder of 2024. And then any increases would occur in the first pay period of March. So we're kind of moving the budgetary impacts from July to back to March. So a slight change there. 3 months. So staff is recommending that Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee recommend council approval to update the past practices of the employee performance appraisal process to those that are outlined in the document. And that would include the budgetary change of compensation adjustments that would move yearly to the March timeframe.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Natasha.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A woman.
We should get a motion first. Is there
Do we have to
anything-
do a motion?
Yeah.
I have a question, though.
Yeah, after the motions.
All righty.
So do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? I will second that for discussion purposes. Okay, Natasha, go ahead.
So we've talked a lot in this committee about could we do the reviews based on a hire date because of the whole confusingness of the step and all of that stuff. So this doesn't seem to be addressing that. And I think we were at a point where we said we really needed to make that decision. Are we going to do reviews based on a date in the calendar or based on hire date? I just wondered what you were thinking about that.
We discussed that with leadership just to kind of get some feedback on it. Overall, the consensus was that just so that no one would ever get lost in the mix of things, trying to make sure that we're paying attention to anniversary dates and things like that. Plus for some people, depending on when they were hired, maybe as a seasonal and then as which date do we go with, things like that. Most prefer to do all of their reviews at one time so that it is consistent and the time is put into the effort of the reviews. And so that was kind of the consensus that came out of leadership.
And I think if I can speak to that, adding to what Sarah said, I mean, when we went to the late spring, early summer schedule in the past, I mean, I'll sometimes hear department and division heads say, and I heard it before when I was first here back in 2011, that they don't like the season of performance reviews. It's a few weeks of grueling to go through them and stuff. Having said that, what I found out and what Sarah found out as well, what they dislike less is the idea of 2 in February, 1 in March, another one in late April, a couple in July. They prefer, even though it's not everybody's favorite thing, to have a set series of weeks where they can just kind of plan on it, sit down, book it, and work through them rather than scatter them throughout 12 months.
Natasha, do you have any follow-up?
Thank you. I have another question. So if we move this back by 3 months, so that's a quarter of the year. I'm just wondering if we have a ballpark. We're going to have to schedule this in the budget that people are going to get their increases. Do they get their increases right after they've done the review if it starts in March? Or do they still get the increase in July 1st?
So right now they get their increases in July. So it's right after the process starts in June and finishes. So by July, that's when all the increases happen currently. So what we're looking to do is move it to where the performance appraisals are done in January and completed in February. And then March would be when the budget changes, like the increases would occur for employees.
Do we need to change the date? Could we just get the reviews done early because that helps with people still keep our date as July 1st?
We certainly could.
Ed, go ahead.
Well, thank you. What, first of all, I think that the difference, because when we give those raises, that means that when we do our budgeting, we're going to have to budget for an extra 2 months at the increased rate, or 3 months at the increased rate, which is going to be an expense towards us, which I don't like that one little bit. We went round and round with this. I can't remember if it was for the whole, I think from what you said, that leadership didn't agree with this or with the way we're doing it now. So leadership is the one that wanted to do this. And I don't know exactly who leadership is, but I think the leadership of the council was that we wanted it on the anniversary dates. As a matter of fact, we went round and round about that.
There was a lot of discussion around it, but no definitive decisions were kind of made from that. Not to my recollection. I might be wrong.
So it's up to us. You know, look, I know everybody thinks they're too busy to do it, but you know, we're all busy. I mean, even the council is busy at all times during the year. I mean, I still think the suggestion of doing this on the anniversary date is the best one to do. And I'm not going to support anything that isn't that. Period.
Let me just chime in for a second. We'll obviously follow your direction, you're the elected officials, but I think one thing you might want to keep in mind, and again, when we talk about leadership, department and division heads weighing on this topic, I think they're also thinking about trying to be as efficient as they can. And I think they also think, beyond the fact that they don't want to do 2 in February, 1 in March, 2 in April, that they probably are thinking it's more efficient if they just buckle down for a few weeks and do it, rather than spreading them out through the year. And I think that may be correct. But again, I mean, we're not trying to look away from your authority. We gave you feedback on what we think makes most sense from our perspective.
Natasha, go ahead.
So, Mrs. Spiros, just for the benefit of our 2 new members, could you refresh all of our memories about why the reviews once a year cause more issues than if they were done on an anniversary date?
I'm trying to think back all the reasons that we had. I'm drawing a blank on what we were thinking, actually. If somebody can.
Well, we've talked a lot about step increases, and that's not what we're talking about at the moment, but that's where some of the concern has come from.
It does affect the step increases, and it affects them in a way that I don't think is favorable to the city's interests.
Well, one, we for sure know that, depending on what comes back from the compensation study, there may be completely a different way that we're going to be doing compensation altogether. I know that it is, but there's potential to move to more of a range versus a step. So, that isn't even like kind of discussed in this, because it very much could make a change that way. Essentially what we were kind of just looking at is making it just a uniform policy. Essentially, the policy is what the policy is. We were just looking to move it back to what the policy actually says versus what we're actually doing right now. But as far as like the compensation piece, certainly if that is, if the feeling is that we want to stick with the July timeframe as far as increases go, I mean, that certainly is an option, absolutely. This model that was presented in the motion is more or less just bringing it in line with kind of the timing that we do now, but just shifting it to the beginning of the year. But absolutely, I think we are open to any discussions or any changing of how things are done. I think we just wanted to, I wanted to provide feedback from staff as far as like what we were thinking from workload and things like that. And this seemed to be the piece that worked the most for staff.
And I think you're about to hear from one department head who has a very busy time when the performance reviews are normally done, right?
Having been here for over 2 decades, we've done it a multitude of different ways. When I first started, we were doing it on the anniversary dates, and then it converted it about 5-6 years into that. They went to January 1st, and then at some point later on, it went to July 1st. So it's been all over the board for the last several decades. You know, it's, you have to throw reminders in your calendar when it's, when you're doing it on the anniversary dates. It's, you know, it can be done anyway, honestly.
Okay, anybody else have anything? I'm gonna add a couple things. I'm trying to recall, we did have a lot of discussion about this, and I'm trying to think back on what really pushed us toward wanting anniversary date evals. And I think it had something to do with if you hired somebody, it's something to do with waiting that 90 days or whatever it is until they can get a step increase. Because if somebody was hired in February and somebody else was hired in March or something like that, the February person wasn't going to get the raise, the March person was, or something. There was something conflicting about that. And I don't remember all the details, but it was a problem. And that's why we've had that compensation problem brought to this committee on multiple occasions, because it just doesn't play out fairly. And that's what we had all determined. That wasn't fair the way that it was being done. For clarification purposes, so you want to do a modified review this summer and have it completed in July so that they can get a raise in July of this year.
As it normally would
Right.
be, correct.
And then they would get a raise in January.
No, they would get their 2024 increase
Mm-hmm.
in March instead of
Don't they get
July.
2 raises a year?
No.
Why have I always thought we gave out 2 raises a year?
If you may,
Go ahead.
I think what you're thinking about is the difference between the stip increases, which they get as a result of the review,
Right.
and then there's the secular, for lack of a better term, raise in the entire scale that happens in July 1st.
But both of them come in July.
Mhm.
I was thinking we separated those. Okay. So you want to do a modified review and give a raise in July, and then you want to start their 2024 reviews in January, have them done by February, and give the increases in March. So that's 4 months prior to what we would do normally. March to July is 4 months, correct? So what is the cost of doing that 4 months early?
Offhand, I don't know. It would be partially based off of whatever is decided by the council as far as what the increase would be overall to if we stick with the steps to the step program, and if we went to ranges, what it would look like for ranges as well. So that's undetermined at this time.
And then as a follow-up, so how would this fix the problem that I had just stated, which I don't have it down pat what it was, but you know what I'm referring to.
Yep, so there were issues and concerns with when someone is hired in January versus when someone is hired, let's say in, July 5th or July 6th, that step increases could happen for a January person, once they hit their 6 months, and then they would get another increase in July. There's that whole piece. So essentially what this would do is it would get us on, we would still have somewhat of the same issue, except it's just kind of moving it back. However, as part of what we would like to see as an adjustment, and again, based on what is determined from a combination of the comp study and what council determines for next year, there is some things that we potentially might have in place as a solution to that. That would include, depending on when a person is hired, they might at a certain time get a portion of a step if we move with the step, or a portion of the range. But it would kind of solve that problem of a length of time, like an extra length of time, more than a year that they would be between increases.
Okay, because that I think was our major problem with the current way we were doing it. And that I think was the major push as to why we wanted to do it on the anniversary date. For me personally, this is bad timing, because first of all, we're looking at changing the system completely, going away from steps to ranges. So we've got all that going on. And then and now you want to, kind of go back. I realize the policy says this, and that the policy was never updated when we made the last change. I get what you're saying as far as that goes. But I don't see us getting rid of that initial problem, which is what we wanted to get rid of by suggesting that their evals be done on their anniversary date. I would simply suggest that HR produce a list each month on the first of the month for all of the managers that say, these are your evals that are due this month. And stick with or change to yearly evaluations done on the anniversary date of the hire. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. Effectively, I mean, if we go to the 30,000-foot level, as I like to call it, there are 3 different components, and they can be tied together, or they can literally be split apart and be totally disconnected. When do performance reviews happen? When do step increases occur? And when does the broad general increase that the council gives to all employees take place? And, you know, the issue you're talking about with the step increases is created by the fact that you need to have a successful performance review to be eligible for a step increase. And that, Rebecca, if you start employment on February 1st and I started on May 1st, we're both going to get our first performance review at the same time when they're all being done. And as a result, you know, you wait longer than I do. You wait an extra 3 months or 4 months or whatever. So that problem's not solved necessarily by a lot of things. You could end up with a system that has it disconnected, that has the performance reviews at your anniversary date, or you could have them all at one time and they could get the step increase at the 1 year interval regardless. As long as your supervisor says, you know what, you were hired on February 1st, it's now January 31st, this person is doing well, please give her her step increase. And even though the performance review might have occurred in December or might occur in April. So there's a mix and match possibility here if you want to look that way. It maybe gets a little bit messy, and that's where I think some of us at staff level are trying to make sure it's a little bit more streamlined so we don't get confused. But they are different elements of the picture. All 3 of them are a little bit different from one another.
Okay. Andrew, go ahead.
Steve, just to clarify here, when you say messy, are you referring to you have 3 different increases across 3 different periods of time?
I only heard the last part of that. Can you say it again?
Oh, when you say it could get messy, are you referring to the fact that the employees could have 3 different increases throughout the year at 3 different times?
No, I'm just talking about the fact that what if their performance review was in, let's say what it is now in the summer, and their anniversary of employment was in October, and the city was giving its raises on January 1st. They wouldn't get any more raises than they would normally be eligible for. It would just be kind of broken up into pieces as to what's happening and keeping track of when do we do her review, when does she get this raise, and when does she get the overall raise. But it wouldn't mean extra pay increases of any kind.
No, okay. And then when do you expect the consultants to come back with their recommendation as far as step versus range?
Right now, the thought is that we will start in June with the study. It would take approximately, I think it said 5 months. And then in between there, obviously, part of the component is that they would be discussing with council options, but then ultimately a decision after those 5 months are completed.
Yeah, the extra component that you added involves a lot of council input. And you made it pretty clear, and we made it pretty clear to Milena of McGrath, that you want to have a conversation about ranges instead of steps. So that, I don't know how early that'll be in the process, but I would guess it'll be fairly early, potentially.
Because I guess what I'm getting at here is that we're potentially premature here as far as changing that, because potentially 6 months down the road here, after they're done with the review, we could be revisiting this all over again just because you changed the compensation structure.
I think ultimately what I was getting at with, and it was kind of twofold. One was just moving the performance appraisal process to the original date that the policy says, which would be starting it in January. And then the other one was adjusting the way we do it budgetarily. However, absolutely, I think we can do it however we would like. But definitely, I would say part of the reason to do a modified one in July this year was more or less because we do recognize that we do need to make some updates to our review form. They're not what we're really looking for as far, it doesn't make sense for some of the positions the way that we do reviews currently. So that is under review. So that is why we were looking to do a modified review form for the July timeframe. But certainly, I think we are open to whatever, council would prefer from staff to do with regard to reviews, as well as compensation. Definitely looking for the feedback.
Yeah, I think whatever this committee and the council decides they want to do at staff level, Sarah and I and the department and division heads working with us are going to get away from the one-size-fits-all performance review form. I mean, if you think about the variety of work that people do and the different departments that they operate in, we need to do this. And I think the staff members have said for a while that we really need to have different types of forms for different people and maybe simplify some of these forms from what they look like now.
Natasha?
Thank you. So I support you doing the review early so that it's not during the busy season. That's totally fine. I think you can make the call on that. I don't support giving the increases early. I think that would need to stay at July 1st. I do agree that we're probably going to change everything. And I would say that if we don't say anniversary date for review, then I would say the two of you need to not bring it to us when there's a kind of compression issue because someone has gone a year and a half before they got their increase or things like that. You would just have to, the buck would stop with you and you would say, this is our policy, and because of this policy, you won't get this early. Now, if you don't like that, then we need to do it by anniversary so that everyone gets it at 6 months and 1 year. But our frustration was it kept on coming to us. And so our problem solving for this is instead of bringing it to us, do anniversary. So if you don't want anniversary, then just don't bring it to us and just say, no, you can't increase them.
Ed?
Yeah, this just occurred to me from our previous conversations when we were talking about doing it just on the anniversary date. And we did that, I think we ended up doing that just for one employee, didn't we? Or was that something like that? I can't remember exactly how that worked. But we're going down that path again where we're conflating the COLA, the cost of living increase that we give that changes the whole pay scale. Not just one person, but it changes the whole pay scale. We're conflating that with the STIP increase. And the STIP increase is totally independent of that, totally independent of that. And I don't care where you stand or what classification you stand in. If we make a deal with somebody that they're hired at STIP 286 or whatever, category 286 with STIP 5 or STIP 4 or whatever we put them in at. And I don't care if they've been in that position after we hired them a month or 6 months or 5 months. Those seem to be magic numbers that they can't get that so-called, we call it a STIP, but it's actually the COLA, the cost of living allowance that they get. I don't care, whatever STIP and grade you're in, when that is assigned and put on the payroll and decided by the council to put on the payroll, it's got to be done, okay?
So part of, I think what we're talking about is two different policies. One is the review policy, and then the other one is the compensation plan. So those are two actually separate policies within what we have for policies. So I would definitely say most of what we're talking about right now is actually not the review policy. It is more the compensation policy, which includes the verbiage that kind of has gotten us to the frustration point, I would say, of, when does someone get their first step increase and things like that. So that is actually in the compensation policy, not in the review policy. So essentially, I definitely see your point as far as, we've definitely understand that there's frustration with anything that we bring forth to you, as far as when it comes to changes in compensation and things like that. So definitely, I would say maybe at this point, since there has been, an increase in, discussion on it, and maybe we're not at a point where we can move forward with this, that maybe we table it and then we can bring forth more additional information in the first meeting in June.
Well, at this point, I believe we have a motion and a second on the floor. Can you read that motion back, please?
Motion by Verge, second by Pierce, to have discussion.
So the motion was only for a discussion purpose. Is that it? So we need to vote on that even though we already had the discussion?
I believe so. If you're going to table it, I would like to see a vote, just to be sure.
I think a motion to table would take precedence over the motion that's on the floor.
And are you making that?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so we have a motion to table this. Do I have a second? And we have a second. Okay. Any further discussion before the vote? All right. So seeing no further discussion, we are voting on the motion to table this to sometime in the future.
If I give a future date.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
And no one's opposed, so we will table that discussion for now. All right. 10, informational session on budgetary level of control presented by Jennifer Zielinski, Finance Director.
Good evening. So as part of our recent discussions on budget amendments and kind of where we stand with all of that, I thought it would be prudent to start with some of the policy behind the budget. So tonight we'll be talking about the budgetary level of control. This will be a high overview of how we get to what you see published in our budget book. It's a good time to review this policy and practice before we start our next round of budgeting processes next month. And I'm going to start with the statutory level and then work our way down to what you see at the staff level. So in statute 65.90, which governs municipal budgets, it really only says you need to present a budget and your expenditures have to be categorized in the following 8 categories. And our revenues need to be categorized in those specific categories. And your budget should essentially balance. So we typically will balance our budget with fund balance applied. So this is just a snapshot from our actual budget book, which shows that how we comply with the state statute and the way we categorize our revenues and expenditures. Once we get to, that's a sample of what the general fund would look like. Once we get to every other fund that we have, you just really see this tiny snapshot. Your total expenditures, they don't have to be broken out between any specific categories. And then your total revenues. And then if you're using any fund balance to balance those specific budgets. So that's basically the high level of what we're seeing. So if we drill that down a little bit, I'm going to go over just a quick summary of how we group these funds that we're talking about. The first and major fund that most people are the most familiar with is our general fund, and it accounts for all of our general activities. Everything that would be supported by taxpayer revenues and state aids. Every government has to have a general fund, one and only general fund. The budget for general funds are lapsing. That means use it or lose it, but there are options to carry forward unspent monies, which we also do. Then we have a group of special revenue funds, and these are the funds that are going to account for the activities that have a dedicated and consistent revenue source, and then very specific expenditures related to that revenue source. These are optional funds. We aren't required to have any. It just helps us keep track of those certain activities that have these dedicated streams. So for an example, our communications fund is a special revenue fund. It gets its revenue from charter. The taxi fund is also an example. It gets its revenue from federal, state grants, as well as user fares. These budgets also lapse. We budget for them every year, also with an option for a carry forward, which I don't think we've traditionally been doing here at the city. We also have a debt service fund. And this simply accounts for all of the activity related to borrowing and repaying debt. So our bonds, our notes, our loans. Every government that borrows money needs a specific debt service fund. And we meet the obligations of the debt service fund through the tax levy. And statute does require that in order to we levy enough to make our debt payments. Again, this is a lapsing fund. Then we get into our capital projects funds, and these are a set of funds that account for longer-term construction projects that will eventually become the city's capital assets. We get our money for these projects through debt service, grants, donations. We can transfer money from another fund to do a project. For instance, the general fund might determine that it needs to kick in on a construction project, so it'll transfer money over to that specific fund. Because of the longer term nature of some projects, the budget for these funds can be non-lapsing. So if we know we're going to build a pool for $7 million, but we're not going to finish it in 1 year, we put the budget in at $7 million, but we post our actual expenditures until the project is finished. Today, we have some gaps on how we carry forward our budget and our capital funds. So we're working to improve the process by making sure that each project has a unique project number, and we keep track of the revenue that's funding that project as well as the expenditures, so we can keep it in balance and know where we stand. That's something that we had in our legacy system. It didn't get fully implemented in our new system at the time, and so we're bringing that back. We began in 2022 and trying to finalize it in 2023. Again, anytime you start to change a process, you get some questions and some things aren't clear. So we are working through those issues as we come up with. As departments have questions, we try to give them, figure out a way that we can make our system provide them the information that they need. And then we have a group of funds called our proprietary funds. There are two types. We have our enterprise funds. Those are our business funds. That's our wastewater fund and our emergency medical system fund. Operate just like a business. They should be self-sustaining with their revenue streams and spending within those revenue stream collections that they have. The second type of proprietary fund is the internal service fund, and that simply provides services to all the other governmental funds. So the internal service fund will provide snow plowing, and it will bill the city for that service. It uses that revenue then to replenish the equipment that it uses to perform the service. So lawn mowing, street sweeping, plowing, whatever activity they provide. And again, these will be lapsing funds. Their budgets expire every single year. Lastly, we have agency funds, and these are where we keep track of the money that can't be used for the government's operating purposes. It's being held in a fiduciary manner for somebody else. So we can think about our property tax collections. Those are accounted for in a separate fund because in December, when we collect all that money, we have to pay the county and the school district and the tech college in January. So we want to keep that separate so it doesn't get commingled in the regular general fund. We also do that with payroll taxes that we have to remit to the state. We don't necessarily get overly concerned with the budgets in those funds because it's simply a pass-through. We're holding it and then turning around and sending it out to the owners of those funds. And then lastly, we have one permanent fund, which is our Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund. And that fund has very strict parameters on the spending. So there's an amount that was used to establish the fund. It can never be spent unless it's for very specific purposes. And I think we'll see something coming up in the 2024 CIP process where we'll consume some of those funds. So what that all looks like when we get down into the accounting, we have an account string that includes a fund that we just went over, functions, departments, objects, and then sometimes projects. So all of the function, department, and object provide further details to the level of spending that the city undertakes. This structure also builds our financial statements that we produce as well as other reporting, helps us monitor. We can monitor expenditures at any one of these levels. So if we say we want to know how much money we spend in a specific object across all departments, across all functions and funds, we can report on that. So that brings us to what I really wanted to talk about today, which is the budgetary level of control. So this is the level at which spending in excess of the budgeted amounts would be a violation of our resolution, our law. So when we think of the budget, a simple majority is all that is needed in order to pass our budget. So that's 6 votes. Anytime we want to change that budget, it requires a hard majority or 7 votes in order to pass it, as well as a Class 1 public notice. So we can start to think about what sorts of things do we want to pass at just a simple majority versus if we need to change it, what kind of activities would we want to pursue an amendment that would require 7 votes. When we talk about that legal level, the statute says the fund. So we could simply say, in the general fund, if our budget is $22 million, and as long as we spend less than that, we don't care where. If we look at our chart and we said we want to look at it by department, then we would hold, if we're Department A is allowed $1 million and Department B is allowed $2 million, that's within the general fund, their max spending. So it all depends on how we want to view that level of control. And this is where we have options, meaning you have options. We can keep it at statute at the fund level. We can further delineate that between function, department, object, or project. So before we say we want to control it at the lowest level, which would be the object, we'll have to take a look at what that means. So the city has 38 funds, so that's the minimum level of control that you have. If you have it at the fund level, that's 38 different levels, depending on what your fund is. The city has 372 functions. So if we want to control it at the function level, then we need to be looking in more detail. It has 35 departments and 599 objects. And then as we build our project, that's going to be unlimited. So that means we've got over 5,000 account string combinations that we could legally control the budget. So we want to find that happy medium between obsessive control down at that object level to a more broader control at that fund level. So what we currently have today, best practice might suggest we have a policy around this. We currently don't have a financial policy around how we want to control the budget. We have a small paragraph within the budget document itself that describes these control functions. And what we currently have is it's at the fund level for all funds, so that very broad level. Within the general fund, we further delineate that to the department level. So, if Public Works is over, but let's say Parks and Rec is under, we can't really blend the two together and say we're good as long as in total we're still under. We have to hold it accountable at each of those. I think we have 35 departments, so each one of those departments has to make sure their budget that they control is under the level. We further have a delineation that for personnel expense versus all your other operating expenses within a department. So if we're running short on FTE, which is something that council approves, our approved FTEs, and if somebody's running vacant, that doesn't mean that the department necessarily can order more supplies because they have room in their department budget. So you still have to meet that's kind of off limits in terms of everything else that a department might buy. Now, what we'll need to do this year is for development services, we're incurring expenses for consultants. So we'll come back towards the end of the year to say, we didn't hire anybody in the department. We need to authorize that spending on the consultant services. So that's an example of how that would work. And then we do have that legal level of control at the object level for the contingency account only. So that's why you see you've been seeing budget amendments for the contingency account. It requires 7 council members to approve that use of contingency, which is, sometimes it's fund balance, sometimes it has a revenue source, but that is one area the only area where we're at the actual object level. In our capital projects funds, except the TIF district funds, we're at the department level. So right now, for instance, our streets are all accounted for in one fund. If one goes over, one goes under, but at the end of the day, we're under, it's okay. And in our TIF districts, we've left that just at the fund. We don't have a lot of activity right now going on in our TIF districts, but in a future state, we might want to start qualifying that at a project level because we would fund specific projects with either debt service or grants or donations, whatever you have, and you might not necessarily just want to move that over to another project that may be running short, something that can be changed. So that's kind of where it looks today, and where I'm asking you is where we want to go from here. So are we satisfied with what we have established as a council? What changes would you like to consider? In capital projects, I think it's prudent to continue at the department level, but unless you were building a specific facility, such as a pool or revamping the Buffalo building, should that come to fruition, that one would land in a fund with other police and fire vehicle purchases and whatnot. But in that case, I feel like it would be prudent. The money is budgeted for the project, and that's it. Should not be able to be commingled with other capital expenditures. And then I would ask if we should formalize how we are establishing our budgetary level of control in a financial policy, or simply update that paragraph that shows up in the budget book each year. That's what's been done historically. And then carrying that forward for future discussion, we'll want to take a look at developing a contingency policy. Do you want to see it at that object level for anything that comes up outside of the normal budget policy? Or do you want to put some dollar parameters around it? Those are all choices that we can establish either in a policy or just update in the budget book. And then as another level of that, we have a fund balance policy, but it doesn't really address how much we want to consume or should be allowed to consume in each budget. Should we, set that as a percentage of available fund balance? Should we allow a certain dollar amount? Should we say none? Those are all decisions that we can either formalize in a policy so that when staff is working on the budget, they have, that sandbox that they know that they can play in. And then as part of the budget development would be priorities. Are we comfortable with the division of our expenditures between our classifications, Parks and Rec versus Public Works versus Health and Human Services versus General Government? Do we like how that distribution looks? And then anything else that is on your mind tonight?
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ed.
Thank you. Jennifer, thanks for the presentation. That's, I've seen other finance directors try and explain it on different levels, and watching the blank stares in the audience that happened. This was down to earth and very readable.
Thank you.
One thing that annoys me is the county, we've got a policy that we don't, we do not come after the department heads unless they have unless they have exceeded the function level. Well, that's a whole lot of leeway. I mean, with all the different accounts they can have, there's a lot of things go there. I think that the reports that we get and things that we do, I think we need to work at a level lower than that. Not all the way down to program necessarily, although I've seen some programs overrun mightily, and things like that. But anyway, I'm glad you brought this because it's something we should be looking at and trying to find a way of doing that. Also, what we did inadvertently is went after something in the last year's budgeting. We went after specifically the travel and training.
Correct.
Yeah, that was basically controlling at the object level.
Correct.
Right? Okay. Well, I don't have any problem with doing that because it sort of gives me a nice roadmap of where to look for problems. But when do you want us to get back to you on some ideas that we might have of where we wanted to take this?
So, I'm not really sure how we take that. I believe we are planning to schedule a council priority session soon, and so I think it would be appropriate to have some direction prior to that. So if you want a policy, I have time to draft a policy. If you still want discussion, do you want to involve full council? Do you want to start here? This is kind of new for a new interaction between staff and the committee, so it's kind of open how to proceed.
I think we could definitely make that a part of it. I mean, that's not the focus I had when I talked at our last meeting about having that session. I was more focused on, looking ahead to what level of service we want to provide, what level of staffing that requires, how to start getting our arms around the broader picture of everything from increasing costs of supplies to benefits to whatever, looking at the 24 budget and beyond, given what we were told by our financial advisor, Dave Ferris. But I think this is a good point because it does come up. It's come up in this body before about how many budget resolutions we've had. And I've been here for 12 years, and it really has depended in large part on who the finance director has been. And that doesn't mean that whether it's been Keith Stry or Ron Ullman or Jennifer Selensky, anybody's been doing it wrong. It's just a different way you look at it, what level we're bringing these to you in. We've had as few as 7 one year, and I think one year we had probably close to 45 or 50 of them. So we do want to know what level of budgetary control you want to involve yourself at, and that does dictate some of the things that we bring to you. They're not statutorily required, as Jennifer, I think, very well explained, but they may be desirable at some point.
Ed, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I know, Steve, that I've always felt that that a council or a city that has a lot of mid-year changes to the budget, a lot of budget resolutions, changing things around and moving around, basically is incompetence on part of the governing body, and I think that's bad. I like to see us give a lot more thought to it and put things in. I think short of, I don't see why we should have so many budget resolutions short of a tornado taking out half the town or something. You know, I really, those are that's how stringent I feel we should be about our budgeting techniques and our budgeting control.
I heard it explained once, it might have been at a conference, that a budget, when it's adopted in the fall, is sort of a contract of sort between the council and the people that they're reflecting and representing the citizens with the staff and what's been prepared. But you could take that a lot of ways. I mean, you've probably seen in the past some budget resolutions that you've looked at and thought, oh, you know, why do we need to do this? And a classic one that comes up a lot is that we get money taken in donations. The police department receives donations for replacement of the canine unit. It's put in a segregated separate account. Ultimately, it needs to be transferred to use. And you're probably thinking, well, do it. That's why the money was given. But some of those things require resolutions or seem to necessitate resolutions, even though you might think we're not breaking the contract with the citizens by using money that they gave for a purpose, for that purpose. But it does appear when you start having too many budget resolutions at a point that either, you know, are you being a little too, for lack of a better term, picky in terms of what you're requiring them to be brought forward with, getting down to too low a level of what Jennifer is describing, or something, I don't know. But it's a system that can be tweaked, and we want your input, very definitely.
Go ahead, Natasha.
Thank you. This is a great start. I feel like I need to process it. I might have to talk with you.
Yes.
Yeah, because I'm like, ooh. But so I think maybe what the council needs to think about is what are situations that haven't worked and what level of control would help for those situations. That might help us know what level of control we want to be at for the budget. So I think we need to think of sort of those situations that have already happened in the past or situations that you want to avoid. And then once we can identify those situations, then maybe Jennifer could say, okay, in this sort of situation, this is where your level of control would help avoid this.
Okay. Anyone have anything else that they'd like to discuss or ask?
If you have any of those, reflecting back to the past 6 to 12 months that we're not thinking of, throw it at, give a call or send us an email. That would probably help us to figure out, what confuses you or what makes you wonder when we bring them forward and what the purposes are sometimes.
Okay. Last call. Anybody have anything else they want to add to this discussion today? I think we're kind of just at the beginning here.
Absolutely.
So I definitely think it warrants further discussion and further education, I think, is a lot of it too. And I do appreciate your presentation. It's done very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So let's see. We're at number 11, suggested items for future agendas. Anyone? All right. With that, I will take do we need a motion to adjourn? Let's call it. All right, we're going to adjourn.